it's overwhelming, but it's also our jobs.
Our job is only going to get harder.
It's worrisome. This is something that's unprecedented.
Now is not the time to be a cowboy. No one has anything to prove. We're all in this together.
Welcome to Reporting from the Frontline of the Pandemic. I'm Victoria Gonzalez, and I'm joined by Gerry Wardwell, Assistant News Director at WCVB News Center 5 in Boston. Thank you so much, Gerry, for joining me today.
You're welcome.
So I wanted to get started by just asking you what your typical day at your job is like and how that has changed since the coronavirus pandemic began.
It's changed everything, number one, from the way that we approach gathering the news, reporting the news, and even just executing our jobs every day. The workflow is totally different, just in terms of, you always hear social distancing. What's that mean to a newsroom? It's pretty hard to run a newsroom when we're all socially distant, but I have news crews that I haven't seen in 7 weeks. Reporters and photographers don't come into our building anymore. We talk to them every day, email them every day, text them every day. We do meet on Zoom a couple times a day with them, but they no longer come in the building and get assignments. So some of us are in the newsroom on some days and some on the others. So again, it's hard to run a newsroom remotely, but the technology has changed everything.
And what are some precautions that the newsroom has taken to keep everybody safe?
Masks. I'm not wearing one now because I'm sitting alone in my office. Generally in the newsroom, I don't wear one either. Some people do, and they can. But it's a pretty big newsroom, so we're pretty spread out with the other things that I just mentioned. But our crews in the field are probably the ones that we're most concerned about, and our anchors in-house, which is why we've sort of done this socially distant thing to stay away from the anchors. But our reporters in the field, who are the ones who are coming in contact with people, they wear masks. They use their microphones on long poles. The idea of putting a lavalier mic on somebody, that's pretty much gone away. So they never get really close to the people that they're interviewing. And depending on the story, we don't put them in a bad situation. We're at hospitals a lot, and we're always asking the question when they go someplace like, are you going to be exposed to anybody? Maybe it's not a good idea to go in that. Live shots where you're close to people that on normal television it might make sense to be in a grocery store, but if the grocery store is crowded, we might say, you know what, do it out front, just to keep people safe.
And along with those things, in terms of the news coverage that you guys are doing, how has that changed in building your newscasts?
It's changed because the content we look for has changed. I mean, I think here at WCVB we've always, no matter the story, looked for the content that impacts people. And this is a story that really just takes that home. It really impacts so many people on so many levels. There's the threat of getting sick, the people that are getting sick, the people that are knowing somebody who got sick or even worse, passed away. But they're the people that have lost their jobs. They don't know where their next meal is coming from, and it sort of changed their lives. So we look for those kinds of stories every day, as opposed to just something on the surface that, hey, this is going on, boom, 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 boom. I mean, we try to find stories to tell across each of those areas that I was talking about, from what's going on in our hospitals. And there's a lot going on here because it's Boston, and where our medical facilities are pretty much on the cutting edge. But to all the other aspects that I talk about, we look for ways to tell stories that mean something to our viewers.
And what would you say has been the hardest part about having to work during this pandemic?
It's one of those stories, I've never covered anything like it. Everybody who I work with pretty much says the same thing. I've never covered anything like it. So we've covered some pretty pretty big stories. I mean, I've been in places where I worked in Miami during Hurricane Andrew. Here we had the marathon bombings, Whitey Bulger, all kinds of stories, snowstorms. Just last year, the Merrimack Valley gas explosions. But this one, it's not as contained as those. Well, a lot of those, it's like, holy cow, and you're all hands on deck, and you're in breaking news mode. This one, it's been going on for weeks and weeks, and we don't know how many more weeks or months that it's going to go on. And it's pretty much all out since it started. I mean, people's vacations have been canceled. Life as we know it has been canceled. I mean, we're the lucky ones that we have a job and we all take it pretty seriously. But it's been one of the more difficult ones because it's a long grind. It's probably one of the biggest stories that we'll ever cover, and we don't yet know really where it's going.
And what are some of the messages that you get from viewers?
It varies. It's funny. I got one today that said, it was one that just said, "Thanks for doing what you do." Not everybody recognizes the news media and the information that we get. So it's nice that you get ones like that. You don't generally get ones like that. We do get a lot of criticism when, depending on the news conferences, depending if we don't stay with the presidential news conference enough. We get criticized from both sides. Like, why are you showing that at all? Why did you get out of it? That's most of the messages we get from viewers that are negative. It generally surrounds the politics. As far as the health and some of the other stories, it's generally positive feedbacks and people pitching stories and that kind of thing.
I'm glad you still get the positive ones.
Yeah, and we do try to mix that up. We have a thing called Five for Good, and where we go out, we just aired one just before I started talking to you, where we go out and we do look for the good stories, because there are, I mentioned the content that we're looking for. Those stories are out there, and it's just finding them to tell, and we recognize, while this is one big negative story, that there's a lot of good out there too, and the good in people sort of comes out. So we look for those stories. Not that those are the lead of our newscast, but we try to include them in our newscasts because we think it's important too.
Has it been more difficult for you to find those specific stories? Like, people maybe not want to, talk to you because they don't want to have that contact, or has it been easier to find the stories?
Sure, no, that's a good question. It's always a challenge, and especially even somebody, when they pitch a story, they may think that their, grandmother making the face mask is the biggest story to come along, and there might be some other version of that is a little better. So it's sort of vetting that and finding it through. But we have a pretty good team of people here that looks for stories. One of our anchors is pretty much does a lot of the Five for Goods, and she's always 3-4 deep because she vets them and checks them and says yes, and then she comes and says, "Which one do you want me to do?" So and that's a good thing. And she does a good job at convincing people to talk and having people pretty much tell their story in their own way, as opposed to having to pry it out of them.
So are you mostly working at the station and then some days at home, or how are you balancing work from home now? So
the way this started, the middle of March, on a Friday, I think Friday, March 13th, we came up with a plan. So managers work an A-B schedule. So I'm the assistant news director. I haven't seen the news director since that day. So I work 3 days a week at the station, and 2 days a week remote, going every other day. She does just the opposite, and then we switch the following week. I work 3 days at home and 2 days at the station. And at first we were doing that 7 days a week. Now that is a month or 2 months practically into it. Yeah, it is really 2 months. we've backed off, and we have the weekends down pretty much. We're still pretty much plugged in the whole time, but it's pretty much just 5 days. But it's a grind, and you have to be ready. And it's running a newsroom from your basement isn't the easiest thing in the world. But again, I marvel at the technology. I'm able to see our news feeds. I mean, our live shots posted. We post them on Zoom. Plus, I have a feed that's actually on a regular computer live. So it's like being there. I might miss some things. It's a little bit of a vacuum, but I can see the chopper on its way to something. I can see a live shot that's not up. I can see that the governor's coming out to do his news conference, or the president's about to talk. And I can see that from my basement. Talking to everybody in the newsroom isn't as easy from my basement, even on Zoom.
So with these new changes in your work environment, how are you managing the stress that comes with it?
That's always another issue in life. It's, you know, I'm one of those people that sort of is, it is what it is. I try to deal with it. That's a good question, because there are stories like this where I mentioned you don't know the end. There are times that you sort of take a deep breath and hope that you're handling it okay. This company's pretty good. While we haven't had a lot of vacations, we're starting to look at what people can do, how people can get time off, because that's what you pretty much have to do to every now and then decompress. And that's the idea that I mentioned, that now we're not 7 days, so we're a couple weekends. We'll take turns. There's still people on call, but we'll take turns and say, why don't you unplug for the weekend? It's not like anyone's going on a cruise or anything, but even, you know, chilling at home, not necessarily plugged into every email that we get and every little thing that happens. You do need a little bit of downtime. So it's looking for, the short answer to your question is it's looking for different ways for a little downtime, because there's not as much of it. So it's looking for the little things to decompress, as opposed to that big, okay, I'm going to take 4 days off, you know.
Just like a small break to help you breathe.
Yeah, exactly.
And as we get closer to May 18th, and maybe things will start to open up slowly, or maybe not, like everything is very uncertain, but what are some changes that you're expecting in the upcoming weeks in the newsroom?
Right now, we're not. We're probably going to approach it the same way. Again, keeping the reporters and the photographers out of the newsroom. And I didn't mention our main reason for that, because we think the face of what we do are our news anchors, and they obviously are operating here in the studio. I know some people in the market have sent their anchors home to anchor. For the most part, ours are here, just because we think it's what viewers look at, it's what viewers know. They're the people that are mainly telling the story. So by keeping fewer people in the newsroom, that keeps the anchors pretty much healthy, that they're not exposed to anybody. We actually have, so in the afternoons, we have an anchor team of 4 people. 2 of them work in the newsroom, pretty spread out. Our 2 main anchors, Ed Harding and Maria Stefanos, I haven't seen them in person in 2 months either. We're in the same building every day, but they come in, they work out of the studio. I haven't been to the studio in 2 months. So we're in the same building, probably, 800 feet from each other, if that far, and I haven't seen them in 2 months. We call each other on the phone, we top line on the computer, we text about things that are going on, but we haven't seen each other face to face. So the short answer, sorry, this one is going on, is that we're probably still going to approach it that way till we're sure that everybody here is safe. So we'll continue the social distancing in the newsroom. Producers have spread out. We have, most of our producers are actually working from home. We have one producer who comes in and sits in the booth and booths all the other producers' newscasts. So if you come into our newsroom, you'd probably look around and go, where is everybody? And A, they're spread out here, and B, a lot of them are home.
That's really interesting to think how you're all working in the same building but still don't see each other.
Yeah, yeah. Just before I talked to you, I was going back and forth with Maria Stefanos on the set on a couple of things, and that's how she started. It was good to hear you, Gerry. I don't know when I'll see you again. And it's that sort of, it's weird. I think it's something that, if you told me 3 months ago that we were going to be doing this, I'd say, what?
You wouldn't believe it.
No.
And my last question for you is, what is some advice that you have for any students that want to go into broadcast journalism?
Work hard, be curious, don't be afraid to ask questions, even in hard times like this. Don't take things at face value. Be aggressive. Telling you all things to be well read. Know what's going on, but it's really just, I say being curious is the number one thing, because everything else will come from that. Holding people accountable. You'll be curious about how A and B doesn't add up, and you'll want to ask people questions about that. So it's really just being curious and being wanting to tell stories, wanting to tell those stories, and I think wanting to make a difference. I think every now and then when you take a step back from what we do, because it's a really fast-moving business, you realize that it does make a difference. And when you do it right, when you try to get things right, which is what most people in this business do, you feel like you've accomplished something. But I think if you're one of those people that's naturally curious, you get up, whether you're on or off, you just want to read the newspaper every day, whether it's online or the same old. I still get them too, but I read them online too. But it's just, that's what you do. That's the way your life is. We have a saying, well, you're a news person, and if you are or you aren't. If it's an effort, and if you're off for the weekend, you go, oh no, I didn't read anything. Oh no, I don't know what's going on. Most news people do just because. And if you're that kind of person, just keep living that way. But be curious and be wanting to tell the best stories you can.
Well, I really appreciate that advice. And is there anything else that you would like to share with us?
No, I hope Emerson gets through this pretty well. I mean, scary times for you guys too. I mean, it's all the online classes that everyone's had to do, but not knowing where things are going, beyond that for students who are still at the school, and life in the dorm, what's that going to be like? It's a trying time for everybody. So I think about schools like Emerson and hope that they pull through this too okay, and that the students pull through it okay, and that the students that are getting out find a job on the other side, because the company I work for is pretty good, and we all still have jobs, but I know people in this business that some companies have had layoffs, some have had furloughs, and I worry about that for young people like you who you're the future. So I hope that that kind of stuff stays available for graduating college students, and they're able to find their way in this business, and it's what it's all about.
Well, thank you very much for your kind words and for taking the time to talk to me, and thank you for all the work that you're doing to keep us informed and safe.
Oh, you're welcome. I hope things go well.
And thank all of you for watching this episode of Reporting from the Frontline of the Pandemic. Again, I was speaking with Gerry Wardwell, Assistant News Director at WCVB News Center 5 in Boston, and I'm Victoria Gonzalez.